Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. This is the Groovy Podcast. My name is Ken Cousin, podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut.
And I'm Baruch, broadcasting from cloudy California this morning.
Today is May 5th, 2016, which just happens to be my son's birthday. How are you,
Congratulations. I'm marvelous, busy, and all good. Have a lot of conferences in the following month. Every month, 3 conferences at least. So yeah, everything is good. I do need to close the shade.
Yeah, I think you do need to lower some shades there. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to correctly start and invite people to this podcast and how to share it publicly and everything. At any rate, I keep trying to do that, and sooner or later I'll get it right. Jen Strader reminded me that we're supposed to announce this ahead of time because she actually tries to watch it live, and I know I make all these gags about us only having half a dozen users or less, but at least I should respect those few that actually are trying to participate. So from now on, I'll try to do better on that.
Yeah, and we actually do know the date relatively couple of days in front, so we definitely should announce it.
Oh yeah, it's my fault. I get that.
Followers. How many followers do we have on Twitter?
How many followers on Twitter? Actually, I could check that out. Here, let me. Why don't you take a look at the show notes for a second, or mention to everybody where the show notes
are. We have an extraordinary 421 followers.
Oh, wow, you checked that out quicker than I did. Very good. Okay. For the group, is that for the Groovy Podcast Twitter account?
Yes.
Yeah, for those who are not aware, Groovy Podcast has a Twitter account. It's at Groovy Podcast. Very simple. I think we have it linked in the show notes as well. The show notes also are in the github.com account of P. Ledbrook under a Groovy Podcast link. So it's github.com/P. Ledbrook/Groovy Podcast. Today we are looking at episode 27.
Groovy Podcast organization for that as well at some time.
Yeah, well, I talked to the No Fluff guy who maintains the homepage, the one that has everything at No Fluff Just Stuff /Groovy Podcast, and he promised to add a link to that, but I don't know when he's going to get a chance to do it. If I take a look at that page, no, I don't think he's added anything yet. But that page, by the way, the Groovy NoFluffJustStuff.com /Groovy Podcast does have links to all of the existing both audio and YouTube-based podcasts. It has the interesting information there, and I don't think it has the show notes yet, but I did tell him about that, and he is going to wind up adding that sooner rather than later, from what I understand. Of course, so will this podcast. This one will wind up going up there very soon. Okay, should we start talking about the news?
Let's talk about the news. Okay. So for me, the most exciting news, I stumbled on one of our, I think, 2 main resources for news, which is the Groovy Calamari newsletter. And that's the HTTP requests project, which looks like a proper replacement for the HTTP builder, which is a Groovy wrapper around Apache HTTP client. Although HTTP builder, we used it for a very long time, it has its own problems, both in dependency management, but also in the API. So looking at the HTTP request project, it really looks like a proper replacement, and I am personally very excited about it. That's one of the most used libraries by me by far, comparing to all the rest, and I'm happy to see there is a very good candidate that I will be more than happy to switch to.
That's very interesting. I mean, I've used the HTTP Builder project, both because it's very popular and also because it's a typical Groovy idiom of providing a Groovy wrapper on an existing project. I think it's just a wrapper on HTTP client. But this new one, the HTTP request library, I put in a few links from things that were commented on in the Groovy Calamari, but I didn't add this one. We're going to have to add that to the show notes. I'm looking at the document.
I already did.
Oh, you did? I guess I'll have to refresh then. At any rate, it does look like the docs are in ASCII doc, which is, boy, it's becoming quite recognizable at this point, isn't it? And it's written by Bud Bird. Do you know Bud Bird?
No, not personally, but I will be more than happy to meet him and buy him a drink, because I was waiting so long for a proper replacement of HTTP Builder.
That's the problem with HTTP Builder, as you point out. It's a good library, but it keeps going stale. I mean, somebody jumps on the project and they make a couple of changes and then nothing happens for a long time. The documentation was always kind of dicey. I used to do my normal thing with open source documentation, which meant I went to the test cases. You know, I went to the source code and looked at the test cases, and that showed how to do all the various features. This HTTP request library looks to be far superior, as you say, and it's got all kinds of, it's got converters in there and the provider libraries and everything. Anything particular you want to comment on in there? Have you used it yet?
Well, no, I just saw it, and it looks great. And again, so a couple of examples for my troubles with HTTP Builder. For example, it has this nice, of course, concept of convention over configuration, and it guesses a lot of things based on the content that you send. For example, it's almost always assumes that the content that you save, the content type that you send, should be the same content type that you expect back, which is not always the case. Sometimes our API, for example, expects JSON but returns XML, and then you are into pain with HTTP Builder. Another example is the converters themselves. There is a very strong assumption that whatever type you get, you should convert. So, for example, when you receive a JSON, HTTP Builder will automatically try to parse this JSON with JSON slurper, which is again not always the case, because sometimes I just want to get the plain text, and overriding those details is very painful in HTTP Builder. So I really hope that the HTTP request library does a better job there, and we will see. So Bud Bird is at Bud Bird Twitter, and I just followed him because he's cool.
Well, I noticed that they're using Jersey as the underlying provider, so that they're using the JAX-RS reference implementation, you know, the Jersey specification, to provide the HTTP connectivity and the RESTful web service connections. They also point out in the docs that they have a Grails plugin called HTTP-requests library, which can be, well, of course, in the actual coordinates for Grails, use HTTP-request-Grails. And it's very early, 0.1.3, and it's even a beta or whatever, but it looks like they've done an awful lot of work. I'm assuming that there's more than one person involved, unless Bud did everything. But
good job, Bud. Good job.
Yeah, it looks like a really nice job. We'll definitely have to check it out and report again at the next Groovy Podcast. Okay, you want to go on and discuss any others? You want me to jump in, or what would you like?
Well, that was for me. You know, my job here is done. I'm a happy person now.
Well, this appears to have been a big week, or a big couple of weeks, for the Rat Pack community. The Rat Pack team has released 4 different releases of Rat Pack, although it looks like the 1.3.0 one was the really big one with all the changes in it, and then there were a series of quick bug fixes or upgrades. For example, the 1.3.3 one simply changing to a new version of Netty, whereas the 1.1 or 1.3.1, 1.3.2 were both generic bug fix releases. 1.3.0 looks to be the most interesting one, and also from what I see, that is the version that's going to be used inside of Dan Wood's Learning Rat Pack book, which is coming out very soon.
Mm-hmm.
So for those people who are interested in Rat Pack, and hopefully that's a growing community, we have a link there to all the different versions, And in that documentation, they have a link to the manual, the API reference, and of course, even the source code, which is usually a good way to find answers to questions. I always like looking at the source code of an open source project. Again, I mentioned it already, but just looking at the tests is your nice little executable documentation, gives you a good sense of how to use this. So that continues to grow, and it's nice.
The lazy among us write open source projects without any documentation at all, expecting people to look at the tests.
Well, I like to say it this way. I like to say that the better, in my experience, the better the developer, the more they care about tests. So my classic example is I was trying to learn how to use the JSON Builder class in the Groovy standard library, org.json or groovy.json.json builder, and the documentation on the Java docs was fine but kind of limited, and it left me with a lot of questions on how to do specific things. So I went to the source code, which is now of course at Apache Groovy, and dug into the test cases and saw it right at the top. It said that the test case was written by Guillaume Laforge himself, the head of the Groovy project. I just went, yes, and started digging, and there were probably 30 different cases covering everything I ever wanted to do with it. So it was very, very helpful as a way to learn how to use the API.
Exactly.
Now, staying on the Rat Pack theme for a moment, Juan Vasquez, have you met him?
Yeah, I don't believe so, not in person.
I've met him at GreatConf, both there, and I think I also met him earlier at another conference. But the U.S. GreatConf last year, I definitely saw him.
Oh, so I definitely, okay, so probably I saw him as well.
Yeah, he's based in Omaha, and he did a presentation at the Omaha Java Users Group and gave a Rat Pack tutorial, which again will be very helpful in getting to know the API and how this is used. I don't think people quite realize how different Rat Pack is from the other standard libraries, and that the asynchronous nature and the idea of it being built on Netty is very powerful. And what he has in his GitHub presentation, he put the slides and the code on a GitHub account, and his presentation talks about how to use lazy bones, how to use basic authentication, how to use OAuth for GitHub, using asset pipeline, drop wizard, everything. And he's got a whole bunch of branches that are all very good at that, everything with a Gradle build file. I'm really looking forward to digging into that. I think the live demo uses Reveal.js and everything. So this is exactly the sort of thing, not to get on my high horse again, but it's the sort of thing that we need in Grails 3 right now, you know, especially when we're talking about some of the profiles. The Rat Pack people are certainly doing a very good job with this. So we have a link in the show notes to Juan's Rat Pack tutorial.
Yes, yes.
So that looks very nice. On the Grails side, speaking of Grails, they've had a couple of nice releases lately. Now they are maintaining the 3.0 and 3.1 release train. The 3.1 is current, and 3.0 looks to be in somewhat of a bug fix type area. Yep. Mm-hmm. So the releases were 3.0.17 as well as 3.1.6. The one that the notes for 3.1.6 mention that they have upgraded Gorm. I didn't realize Gorm had a separate version number from Grails, but they claimed it's 5.0.5, and the big factor is that it supports Hibernate 5.1. Have you used the Hibernate 5 series yet?
Well, not so much. We kind of went away from the whole ORM thing here in JFrog. None of our projects actually need it. Right, and I believe that if you don't need it, don't do it. I follow the releases, but I look for the news. But I did actually write any code with it.
Well, I don't know what the differences are in Hibernate 5 as opposed to 4. You know, how much of a difference that makes on a practical sense. But it's good that they are keeping up with developments there. I don't see any documentation at Hibernate itself discussing what the changes are, which, by the way, is, again, I want to make a mild complaint. It's not a big complaint, but a mild one. When they're doing their new releases at Grails, they rarely are saying as a summary of what's changed anymore. They just have a link to the actual issues that have been resolved. And I don't really want to comb through all those issues to try to figure out on a case-by-case basis what's interesting. They do occasionally point out big ones. It's possible, of course, that maybe the changes in the versions are simply, minor bug fix versions. It's possible. But it would be nice to have words to that effect or some kind of summary or something like that.
Yep.
It looks like there is a migration guide in Hibernate. The 5.1 migration guide just talks about minor changes in the Oracle 12c dialect having to do with byte arrays and blobs and stuff. So I don't know that there have been dramatic changes. Maybe in the 5.0 to from 4.3 to 5.0 was relatively significant. They do have a list of changes there in terms of naming strategies and transactions. But my sense of it is that everything that I'm currently using or everything I currently understand about Hibernate carries over. That would make sense for a...
Yeah, of course. I don't believe that it can be any different in terms of, like absolutely different. It won't make any sense.
Well, for
ORM is ORM, right? Anyhow.
Yeah, for a project mature enough to be at a 5 level, that's probably not a big surprise. But I will take a look at that. I'm a little embarrassed to say that I'm still primarily using the Grails 2. Sequence, mostly because the clients I deal with are. And it's time, certainly beyond time for me to start pushing the 3 sequence. It's certainly stable enough at this point to be usable. And, that's got a lot of very nice features in it. I'm still hoping for more documentation on the reduced profiles as well, even though that's competing in the same space as Ratpack or others. But still, that would be useful to see recommended practices and how to set those up and use them. That goes beyond just go look at this GitHub repository and there's an example there.
Yeah, and you, of all people, should actually drive it forward, right? Because you have this... You are in front of clients and you can say, okay, I will do whatever you need with Grails 2, but that's time for you to start to look at Grails 3.
Well, my only problem there is I am kind of constrained by what the clients are willing to do at this point, and I'm running into a lot more clients that are interested in working with existing 2.x versions. So we push into the 2.5 line. That's the royal we, right? No, that's what I try to recommend, but the 3 series is certainly something I'm going to start pushing much more in the future, as much as I can. I'm hoping that there'll be more documentation as well on that, although the user guide has gotten to be very, very good on that. Another issue... Oh, go ahead. You're going to say?
No, I'm with you.
Okay, another interesting thing related to Grails is that apparently there's a whole separate set of documentation for the JSON views. I put a link in the show notes. Again, I kind of got that from the Grails Diary by Jakob Mikkelsen. And it's got a whole series of links and everything. It's actually, it looks again like ASCII Doctor, where they have an extensive discussion about the Grails Views project, which includes the new JSON views approach, the thing that we linked to last time with Jeff Brown doing a brief screencast on using JSON views with the streaming JSON builder and everything else. Looks very easy to use, very powerful, got a lot of templates and configuration and everything. So there's a link in there. I don't know if this is going to ultimately be wrapped into the overall Grails documentation. I expect it will, but at the moment there is this separate link, and it looks like it was written by Graham Roche himself.
Yep, that's good as well, and I'm not sure why it's separate, but
it could just be that this is a stage along the development of just making sure this is available before they wrap it into a particular version of Grails. If I look at again, might have been nice if I'd done this ahead of time, but if I look at the Grails documentation itself, and I just go look at the user guide, I'm sure there's something in there. Yeah, that section 10.1.8 on JSON views is just basically a summary, and it's a way to get started. They do have additional links inside that, as well as the link to the source code repository. So I suspect that this... Now, again, as we pointed out, Grails right now in the documentation sense is paying some technical debt for having done their docs in their own custom mechanism that wasn't ASCII doc or anything like that. And I suspect that part of the porting process is building the separate ASCII doc version of the documentation. So it looks like this information is very similar, but they have the ASCII doc one, and I imagine as they slowly port everything in the current Grails documentation over to that, then everything will be merged in the future.
All right. Okay.
Okay, so that's that one, and
we'll wait for that.
Yeah, we have the link inside the news items, the JSON views docs as well. I don't have the link to the Grails documentation. That's the normal Grails user guide. Just go to grails.org and click documentation and then click user guide. They have it right there. And a simple search on JSON views takes you to section 10.1.8. Another thing that's going on, of course, is that the OCI has established a Grails team blog. Have you looked through that much lately?
Yeah, I looked at it, but took a look at the Slack channel, and you definitely should join, and that's great, right? That's exactly the collaboration that you want.
Yeah, this is relatively new. They've had the blog for a couple of months now. The first post is from the beginning of March. I mean, not exactly a long time ago, but it's available. The latest post was just from this week, the 28th of April, from Jeff Brown, again, as you mentioned, discussing the Slack channel, which has a link both to the Slack channel and to the sign up for that. I think we should emphasize how useful that particular Slack channel is. A lot of the core team members spend a lot of time there answering questions so that people can go through their normal approach of looking at Stack Overflow or what have you. But that if you are banging your head against a brick wall for more than a day, certainly I'd say it's certainly worth going to the Slack channel, trying to get answers there. The only problem I have with Slack normally is that it's hard for me to find answers to questions that have already been answered. I mean, is any of that archived anywhere? Is that searchable in some way?
Well, so I guess it depends on the Slack subscription, and different subscriptions have different retention, but whatever is saved is searchable.
Yeah, because I hate asking questions that I know have already been answered. I do like the idea of searching. I'm much more of a lurker than a participant in those sorts of things. But I know that there are a lot of people there who are constantly discussing current issues in Grails, and that's a good thing. At any rate, so on the team blog, they mentioned the Slack channel. They also have a link discussing those JSON views, exactly what we were talking about earlier. And I like the original link is the one on the Grails 3 interceptors, which is designed to replace the filters in the previous versions of Grails. So if you're so if you're interested in any of that, they're all listed on the official title is the OCI Grails team blog, and it's at grailsblog.ociweb.com. So that was another item mentioned. I think that's all the Grails stuff I have at the moment. There was another release, and that is the Gradle 2.13 release. Again,
yeah, and it has a couple of interesting features as well.
Yeah.
Right. So what I like the most is this ability to merge builds now. How do you call it?
The ability to build the multiple builds together. You mean what they're calling the
right? Yes. I just lost my show notes. Exactly. The ability
they call it a composite build.
Right, exactly. Yes.
And it's like I sit there and think, well, composite build, my initial thought is we already do multiple Grails builds, but they're all part of one project. It's multi-project build. But this apparently allows you to combine multiple Gradle builds, and replace external binary dependencies with, I'm reading from the docs, from project dependencies as if you were using a single multi-project build. For projects that use multiple distinct Gradle builds, this will allow you to mix and match your separate builds into one build in a very flexible way. That's really going to be useful. I agree with you.
Yeah, so from what I understand, it's a one level up from, just mentioning the modules in Gradle settings. That will allow you to take two completely separate Gradle builds and make them behave as they are modules of each other.
Yeah, I cannot imagine quite how that's going to work. I'm looking forward to experimenting with that. I haven't tried it yet. I did upgrade to 2.13, but that's because SDK Manager makes it so easy to upgrade anything, you know? So, of course,
Exactly.
I did that. Of course, the biggest thing in 2.13 is the significant performance improvements. They are claiming, let me read again from it. It says, we've achieved performance improvements during Gradle's configuration and execution phases. Those are two separate things. And of course, configuration phase is always a tough target for performance, but a very profitable one. At any rate, where we have measured up to 25% improvements to build time in their performance tests, with no changes to the build script. You just upgrade your Gradle to 2.13 and you get...
You just upgrade, like in the times of the Murlow, when you just upgraded your hardware and boom, everything was performed better.
Yeah, I think that's great. And of course, I know they've been working very hard on performance over the past several versions. So it's nice to see that. They also mentioned something about improving the Gradle test kit as well. I'm mildly, well, not mildly, I'm getting increasingly embarrassed that I have not yet used the Gradle test kit, even though I use Gradle builds all the time. My testing has been in the form of logging, which isn't really testing at all.
Yeah, and for me, the next big thing will be parallel parallel resolution and download of dependencies. That will give a huge boost to overall performance of the build, and I'm not so sure why it wasn't done by now, but I would say that should be done better sooner than later.
Well, downloading of dependencies is just a one-time cost, right? I mean, you have everything in your cache after that. Are you talking about loading the dependencies at configuration?
No, I'm talking about downloads. Well, that's maybe only me because I do a lot of, like new and clean builds for webcasts and conferences and this kind of stuff. When I start with empty environment and everything, especially on the CI servers, and generally the case of CI servers is actually critical because, for example, if you use one of the cloud-based CI servers, they spin up a new virtual machine without cache for you every time. That's not exactly accurate statement. You can configure some of the CI servers to actually keep the cache around, but the general use case is you have a clean virtual machine, which means every build downloads all the dependencies in you.
Okay, I didn't think that much about that because I have a big cache on my local machine, unfortunately, but that's what I'm always using. I did notice, by the way, speaking of CI servers, another change in Gradle 2.13 is they have the signing plugin, which I've seen before, but the quote says it supports OpenPGP subkeys, so you can keep your master signing keys safely off your CI server, and that was contributed by the community. I haven't done that before. Do you use some kind of signing keys on your CI server when you're doing those demos?
Yes, but so the signing I show is signing on Bintray, but it makes perfect sense. The problem is that you actually need to put your key in your CI server. You don't want to do that, and those sub keys allow you to create some kind of other key pair that signs with your keeper without actually exposing the private key.
Interesting. The link that we put in the show notes takes you to the post at the Gradle forum. That's a good resource as well, and possibly a little under-publicized. I mean, if you go to Gradle.org, you see the link to the forum, but those forums are also quite useful. A lot of the Gradle experts do hang out in those forums and answer questions there. So while the new version was announced in multiple places, I thought it'd be nice to put the link that encouraged people to go to the Gradle forum to check that out. They also, by the way, have a link there to the Gradle Summit, which is coming up in June. Are you going to be at the Gradle Summit, by the way?
No, I don't believe I will because we have June is crazy. I think I will stop by just because it's next door here. Just to say hi to everybody, but no, I'm not being at the conference per se.
Yeah, it's June 23rd and 24th in Palo Alto. I will be there. I'm doing my Gradle recipes for Android talk again, which keeps getting changed. The hardest part I find about the Gradle Summit is a personal thing. It's that the talks are only 45 minutes long, and as a no fluff, just stuff speaker, I'm accustomed to an hour and a half pace. And when you combine that with the fact that I'm a technical trainer by day, and therefore my job consists of continuing to talk until people either agree or give up, I can talk indefinitely on these things, and 45 minutes is really tight for me. I'm sure the audience appreciates it.
You are an exception with your no flutter stuff gang, because 45 minutes, an hour, something along those lines is the standard. Yeah, the hour and a half is an exception.
Just means I have to have my demos all ready to go and my gags all figured out ahead of time and stuff. So, but at any rate, I'm looking forward to that. This time, I'm going to make sure I go for the whole thing and make sure I attend as many talks as possible. Last couple of times I've been there, I've been so flooded with other work that I was barely able to do more than just my own talks. This time, I want to see everything. I'm sure there will be lots of discussions about the plans for Gradle 3. I know they've been hard at work on the underlying model, and especially on the sense of performance improvements. And that's going to be very interesting. By the way, you're familiar with the Indeed.com job trends link? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes.
Right. And if you ever search on Gradle in that, you get to see the skyrocketing interest in Gradle. Thousands of %, both in absolute and in relative, in the gains over the past few months or years. Interest in Gradle continues to increase. Plus, they're spending a lot of time on adapting Gradle for C and C++ projects to work over in the .NET area. And that, of course, will also help the Android stuff eventually when you're working with the NDK as well. So that's a very active area of work and improvement, and I encourage people to keep an eye on that one.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, so first of all, talking about trends and how popular technology is, there is another great site for you to see those trends, and it's called SO, like Stack Overflow, tagtrends.com, SO tagtrends.com, and it does what it says. It compares the trends of tags in terms of questions asked over time, and you can see there how Gradle and Maven stack up, and this is a very, very interesting comparison as well.
On Stack Overflow, those tags are specifically for Stack Overflow, interestingly enough.
Yes, that's a search in Stack Overflow, which brings me back to the discussion about Gradle Forum and a general interesting dilemma of how to establish your own forum or your own Q&A community. Should you have your own forum like Gradle guys, or should you give up on having your own and just forward everybody to Stack Overflow, like, for example, the Spring project does, and all the Google development projects do? They just say we don't want this segmentation of knowledge, and Stack Overflow is the source de facto of this knowledge, and just go there and ask there. And then, of course, the trends are more relevant. So when you look at this Stack Overflow tagtrends.com and see the Gradle questions, you need to remember that that's only part of the questions asked, because a big part is asked in the official Gradle forum as well. So that's an interesting dilemma that we at JFrog are debating now as well. So yeah, that's something dear to my heart. I wanted to say something else about Gradle. Oh yes, the lint plugin. We need to add it. We have to add it to the show notes.
The lint, the code quality checker kind of thing?
Yes. So I had some unpleasant accident a couple of weeks ago when my words was misrepresented by someone on Twitter, and they basically put up some bogus statement that I claimed that Gradle is not good, which I of course never did. and it brought me the good side effect of that I got on Skype with Hans Doctor, the founder of Docker, of course, who asked me what that's supposed to mean, and
founder of Gradle.
Of course, explained the Gradle, and I, of course, explained that I was misquoted, but then we spoke about the acceptance of Gradle in the industry and what still holds it back a little bit compared to Maven, and I mentioned that I feel that one of the problems of Gradle is being too powerful. And the old school build masters afraid of giving this power to the developers, adding the Gradle build to the source, to the project sources, because people will go crazy and pollute the build script with their own, custom logic and make it completely unmaintainable imperative mess. And Hans pointed me to this great lint plugin, which might be, for me, the big leap forward for acceptance of Gradle in the enterprise. This is what I call the bloody enterprise plugin, which you turn on, and then you won't allow your developers to add any imperative parts to your build. So it will behave much more like a Maven Pong XML, in which you can add dependencies. You can play with dependency management, but not writing your custom code in the build script. And I believe that Lint plugin does that, and publicizing it correctly and presenting it correctly, I think might take Gradle to places where people were afraid to take it so far.
Well, to take a look, I mean, it says it's the Nebula Lint one, right? The Nebula plugins?
Yes.
Yeah, so
yes.
It says the Gradle Lint plugin is a pluggable and configurable linter tool for identifying and reporting on patterns of misuse and deprecations in Gradle scripts and related files, inspired by the ESLint tool from JavaScript and various formatting tools as well. It looks like
exactly.
You can turn on and off various rules and things like that, which is always so important in tools like that because of different code styles adopted at different locations. Yeah, it looks very powerful. I'm going to have to try that one out. I'm sure it's listed in the plugins.gradle site. When I did a just simple Google on it, I went right to the GitHub repository. But they support that new plugin notation with the plugins block inside the Gradle file with an ID, which tends to imply that it's searchable inside the plugins.gradle.org
Yes,
site.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that always reminds me, my favorite plugin was always Gradle, which Hans had told me about at a conference. And of course, now that the lead developer works at Apple, I'm hoping somebody takes that over. He's no longer available.
Gradle is amazing. Absolutely, it is.
I hope that somebody maintains that. I don't want that to go away in any actual way. Okay, yeah, we'll definitely add that to the show notes then, unless you already have and didn't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Did you already add it, or should I? We'll take care of it after the work.
I will. Yeah, we will take care of it.
Okay. By the way, speaking of Gradle, again, Gradle does publish a newsletter that comes out somewhat irregularly, but we did put a link in there to the Gradle newsletter in case you're interested in subscribing. The last one is for March, but nevertheless, it describes changes in 2013 and the composite builds and other features as well. Speaking of documentation, the Jeepers website now has been completely redone, and all of the documentation and everything is now over there. That's GPARS, what a lot of people call Jeepars, but I feel I have to call Jeepers because otherwise, where's the gag, right? I mean, if you're going to name it that, you're expecting people to use the joke, right?
Yes.
I still feel like Jeepers is one of those known. I can't think of the right way to say it. It's not nearly as well known as it ought to be. It's a true typical Groovy idiom of taking multiple libraries from disparate locations and putting them all under a Groovy header and simplifying the API and the way to work with them. As a reminder to those who are not familiar with it, Jeepers has features involving actors from the actor model from Scala and other languages, or agents from Clojure, or concurrent sequential processes, a whole series of other underlying concurrency mechanisms that are very, very powerful and surprisingly easy to use. I mean, concurrency in general is just hard, but it's nice to see that they're able to make it easy to use within Groovy. Now, one version of Jeepers is already included in the Groovy standard installation, but if you're going to use it in a Gradle build file, then you're going to need the Groovy All library and the Jeepers library. And the website now has thorough documentation for the user guide, reference docs, links to the GitHub repository, and everything. It's another one of those sites that has extensive examples and documentation that very few developers, even in the Groovy community, seem to be aware of. So I'm glad to mention that whenever we get a chance. Yeah,
and generally, I believe that gparse brings so much to Groovy. It has any concept of concurrent or non-blocking computations. You can use actors, you can use streams, you can do parallel computing, you can do everything. And so we're talking about the big thing that made Scala popular, the Akka library. Boom, we have it in Groovy. We are talking about how streams are important for Java 8. Boom, we already have it in Groovy for years. So and it's completely under the radar, and that's a shame.
Well, there is a chapter in the second edition of Groovy in Action that discusses it, which will give you just the barest of intros, and then if you now investigate the website, which is, as I say, that was the reason for bringing this up now, is that the website now has been redesigned to make all that information much easier to follow and to find. So that's very good. Now, then I had the section from the pieces from the Groovy Calamari, so the one that you just added. I mentioned the links they had there on the continuous integration with Grails. There's a blog article, actually it's a dzone article on how to maintain a continuous integration server with Grails jobs on there as well, and a continuous deployment article with Gradle and Docker, no less. So that's I think the title of that article is a continuous deployment pipeline with Gradle and Docker as well. And then, of course, Cedric Champeau, as he is wont to do, wrote a very nice, thorough article on Gradle performance and the changes they are making in order to improve performance over there now that he's a full-time person at Gradle. I still want to call them Gradleware. I always have to stop myself. Yeah, so at any rate, I put links to all those inside the show notes. So feel free to take a look at that if any are relevant for you. Just one minor note of, I wrote a blog post myself about about working with Gradle and excluding tasks by a pattern in the name. It was one of the first times I've gotten a chance to actually wait for the task graph to be assembled and then do a filter on it as part of the process. So I wrote a little blog post for it. I've been interested in that because the work I've been doing with Gradle on Android is very interesting, because Gradle projects that are applied to Android tend to have literally hundreds of tasks involved, and it's almost overwhelming how complex they get, how quickly. So any way that you can filter that down is very helpful.
Right.
Finally, at least in our list here, you may have some other ideas to discuss. The hot topic this week, especially on Twitter, hot topic. Does that mean in the absolute world? No. Does that mean in the Groovy world? Well, I don't know, maybe. Does it mean in me and my friends? Yes. One of the hot topics was good old Dan-veloper, Dan Woods, who is just about ready to release Learning Ratpack. I believe it is in the final stages of copy edit and production. Wrote a nice post called Learning Ratpack and Giving Back, in which he announced that all royalties from the book Learning Ratpack will be given to the Great Ladies organization. It's a group of developers, especially women, but they also have what they call great allies as well that can help out, based in Minneapolis. Jen Strader is one of the leaders of that, and there are others as well. Now, he kind of buried the lead on that. If you read the blog post, it takes several paragraphs before he finally throws in at the end of a line, oh, by the way, we're giving all the royalties to Great Ladies, which really should have been in big boldface, you know. But he feels that it's not only a nice contribution to the open source community, it also helps them specifically and helps the issue of diversity. We tend to be, I find in this community, especially among the Groovy and Grails people, we are a rather homogeneous one, but we are quite an international one. So there's a lot of people from all over the world, but anything that helps the cause of increasing the number of underrepresented minorities or women in this community has got to be a good thing, especially given how people in this community, certain guys, behave very poorly in general. So this is pulling the stick quite over to the other side. Very helpful. I am concerned that the Great Ladies are going to now discover, to their disappointment, the economics of book publishing. You know, I think Dan's not exactly giving up millions of dollars here, I don't think. As I like to say it, when somebody buys my book, then I can buy a cup of coffee, but not at Starbucks, you know. So we're not talking huge amounts of finances here, but I do not want to.
Yeah, so you cannot make a living of publishing a technical book, but it will definitely help to the non-profit organization. So I think it's definitely will end up in hundreds of dollars, which is an absolutely decent donation, and Dan is great for doing that.
It's a very generous thing to do regardless. And
exactly.
Even if the biggest contribution is publicity for the Great Ladies group, as well as for Rat Pack as well. It's going to get people buying Learning Rat Pack who would not even necessarily been interested, just to support the organization. It's all good. I mean, on every level, this is a really nice thing to do. And while we normally give Dan a hard time just because it's so fun to do so, and he, of course, handles it so well, I'm actually going to have to not do that this time. You know, I mean, he just did a one, not to mention the fact, by the way, that it's a really, really good book, you know, which just makes the whole thing even more significant.
Well, I can't believe we do it for the last couple of minutes, praising Dan Woods in any possible way. So I think we'll do it just one time. This time we should say all the good things we can possibly say, because that will probably be the last time we say nice things about Dan. So we should go all the way.
Yeah,
and
right. I do want to mention.
Yeah, no. So Dan is absolutely fabulous in any possible way, both for writing this book and actually managed to deliver. And I'm a failed book author, so I know how hard it is. So that's great job. And of course, the donation is very generous of him as well. So Dan, good job.
Now, I have to mention, I've actually arranged that we're going to have another one of those special editions of the Groovy Podcast where I have arranged to talk to Jen Strader, and we will be having our discussion very soon and give her a chance to talk about the organization, talk about what she's doing. She's, by the way, going to be another one of the speakers at the Great Conf in EU. She also has that Fulbright scholarship coming up at Copenhagen. So we'll get a chance to talk about all of that. We'll see if we can get any input from Dan as well. So that's coming very soon after this podcast.
Yep.
Did you want to mention anything about the upcoming conferences as well? I just mentioned Great Conf in the EU, which is the 3rd of June.
Right. Yeah. So Great Conf is coming fast, and you should be there. Great Conf US. I'm still a little bit surprised they didn't handle out the agenda yet, but probably we'll have some time. So that's
they have a whole nother month. So I mean, they're not until the end of July. So that's really 2 months after the EU one. So
right. Yeah. Okay. So that's it. So Gradle Summit, Great Conf EU, those are the closest ones, and you should be there if you can.
Right. Then
we definitely will.
The G3 Summit is the follow-on to the former Spring 1 2GX. Now that they have gone their separate ways, the 2GX part is supposedly going to become the G3 Summit, which stands for Groovy, Gradle, and Grails. Although I suppose if we talk to Andre Salmire, probably one of those is Griffin. Who knows? But
the good news here that it's ambiguous. You can select the 3 Gs that you like and just think about them.
Precisely. And I'm really hoping this is going to be as a major league replacement for the 2GX part of Spring 1 2GX, dating back to when we had the original 2GX by itself. The G3 Summit
will be... Is the CFP open for it already?
It is, actually. Yeah, you can submit anything you like, whenever you like. If you can't find it or you can't find anything else, feel free to contact me. I can put you in touch with the right people. It's a little early to worry too much about it, but it's not too early to start discussing it and to figuring out who else needs to be invited, what other topics needs to be covered. It's going to be a nice conference, in addition to the fact that it's Fort Lauderdale at the beginning of December, which is also a good combination.
All right, so I'm going to submit the Groovy puzzlers right now.
Very good. I may have run into another Groovy puzzler. I'll have to send you an email. Let's see how that goes.
Please do. So as you probably heard, the third season is on. No antenna delivered it with Andres at Greece conference.
Mm-hmm.
The next show will be, of course, a GradeConf EU. Hopefully it will be accepted to GradeConf US as well. And next will be the 3G Summit.
Yep. And then we'll see if it gets accepted at Java 1 as well. The Java 1 call for papers, I think, has less than a week to go. I think that closes on the 9th or 10th, something like that.
On the 9th, yes, on the 9th.
Right. Exactly. I have not yet submitted any Groovy talks, but I think I will. From what I understand, they will be looking more favorably on the alternative languages this year than in some of the past years. So it's probably worth submitting a couple of abstracts just to see what happens.
It's always worth submitting, right?
I suppose. Again, we have to thank Jakob Mikkelsen for all of his extremely hard work on the Grails Diary, without which this podcast might not even be possible, as well as, is it Sergio Del Amo, who does the Groovy Calamari?
Yes.
Which is spelled differently than I expected, but at any rate, it's there. Where else do we get information? Anybody? Well, we definitely want to mention the No Fluff Just Stuff conference, who hosts our homepage. That's very nice of them. Anything else you want to mention at the end here?
Well, I think that will be all. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. I hope Peter was feeling a bit under the weather this week, and so therefore he wasn't available, but I'm sure he will be back, and we'll get to find out what he's been working on, how he's doing these days. But in the meantime, there you go for this episode of the Groovy Podcast, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, guys, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.